What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Android format video. And in this video, I'm going to be covering the winning deck from the last Android tournament, which is this Tomato Control deck built by the duelist known as Kesha. Now, Tomato Control is the name for like the generic good stuff deck in Android format. I've also seen the term Beast Spellcaster being used for this deck because it plays Buzzy the Soul Eater, which is the Beast, and some Kaikus and Gemini Elves, which are spellcasters. But either way, this is just sort of like the generic aggro good stuff deck in this format, and it's really, really good. This sort of deck has won, I'm pretty sure, like every tournament in this format that's been held. So it may be potentially like a tier 0 format. Unclear, haven't tested out all the other decks yet. But even if it is a tier 0 format, this is very fun to play. Before we dive in to the card-by-card deck breakdown here, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. I'm planning on releasing a lot more Android content in the coming days and weeks. So if you want to keep up to date with all that, then subscribing is the best way to do that. We hit our 600 subscriber goal for April. We're actually pretty far above that, 617 right now at the time of recording. And while it may be a high goal, I'm setting my goal for May at 750. And if we do reach that goal, I have a special video planned. So, if you want to see what that video may be, subscribing is the best way to do so. In addition, if you want to play any of the formats that I feature in my videos for yourself, then we have a Discord server. Link will be in the description down below, but it's a great place to find games in these obscure and underexplored formats. And lastly, if you enjoy the video, as always, please do leave a like. It really helps out the channel quite a bit. But with all that out of the way, let's dive into the deck. So if you watched my guide to Android format, then this deck shouldn't look too unfamiliar to you because this was the example deck that I showed off in that video. And I went through a brief card by card there, but let's just go through another card by card here in case you didn't see that one. So starting off, we have the triangle of beaters that really define this format. Gemini Elf, which is the level 4 vanilla with the highest attack. We have Buzzy the Soul Eater, which is a level 4 monster that can banish up to 3 cards from your graveyard, and this card gains 300 attack for each one of them, so this card can deal with Gemini Elf. And lastly, we have Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, which prevents your opponent from banishing cards from their graveyard, and if it inflicts battle damage, then you get to banish 2 cards from your opponent's graveyard. So Kaiku kind of counters Bazoo because it prevents Bazoo from boosting up his attack, and Gemini Elf can counter Kaiku because it just gets over it with 1900 attack. So these 3 beaters are like the backbone of a lot of decks in this format, and so this deck is playing 2 each of them. Now, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the ratio of 2 each. I think that maybe it can be good to increase the monster count a little bit. But when diving in to a new format, it's often best to just start by playing some of the top decks that have done well and seeing how you like the feel of them. Oftentimes you look at a deck list and you have some reservations about some cards, and then you actually get into some games with it and you realize that no, that actually is probably the best choice. Not saying that happened here or didn't happen here. You'll have to watch the games to find out. But I do think that this is a good approach in general when you're first entering a new format. Next up, we've got 3 Mystic Tomatoes, which give the deck the tomato part of Tomato Control. And Tomato is great at keeping field presence and also being able to tutor out things like a Sangan or a Witch of Black Forest, both of which are great recruiters in this format for searching out various parts of your deck. This deck is also playing a Masked Sorcerer to bring out off of Tomato potentially to get in for a draw, and a Cannon Soldier, which is just great at ending the game out of nowhere, especially if you search it off of something like a Witch or a Sangan near the end of the game. For our final monsters, we've got a Magician of Faith to get back any of our power spells. And lastly, we've got a Jinzo. Now, Jinzo is one of the meta-defining cards in this format. It's the reason this format is named Android, since that's the Japanese name of this card. And it's just incredibly good. There are many ways to bring it out. One of the best is, painful choicing and sending a Jinzo off of the painful choice to either get it to your hand or to the graveyard. And then once it's in the graveyard, you can use any of the various revival spells in the format like Monster Reborn, Call of the Haunted, or even Premature Burial, which this deck list is not playing, to bring it back in a way that keeps it around on the field. And once it's on the field, negating all your opponent's traps basically shuts off any ways that they have to interact with you during your turn. Of course, they can still activate quick play spells like Rush Recklessly and Mystical Space Typhoon, or activate monster effects like Karibo, but other than that, they have no real way of interacting with you and preventing your big damage pushes. So this card is insanely good at closing out games. For these spells, we've got some very powerful limited spells, starting with the classic Power 5, Change of Heart, Dark Hole, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, and Monster Reborn, all of which are incredibly good and see play in pretty much every deck. We've also got the 3 hand rips, Confiscation, Liquid Duo, and Forceful Sentry, all of which are great at dismantling your opponent's hand. We've also got 1 Fisher to act as more monster removal, as monsters are really the key aspect of this format. You know, the most powerful cards in this format are probably spells, but these monsters are incredibly good at getting aggressive pressure going, and the game can be won or lost based on who has the aggressive pressure on the field at what point. For spell and trap removal, we've got 3 Mystical Space Typhoon and 1 Heavy Storm. I think this ratio makes sense. Mystical Space Typhoon is great at being a reactive spell and trap remover. So for instance, if your opponent activates something like Imperial Order, you can chain Mystical Space Typhoon to it and prevent them from getting off that powerful effect. So I do like Mystical Space Typhoon in this format a lot. And the Heavy Storm is just great at mass back row removal, which can come up quite a bit. We've got this Painful Choice here, which, as I mentioned, can send Jinzo, but it's also great at setting up your graveyard for things like Bazoo the Soul Eater and Skull Lair, which we'll talk about in a second. But in this format, getting a lot of cards engraved to banish off of these powerful cards is really, really important. So Painful Choice helps that out a lot, while also getting you a powerful card to hand. And lastly, we've got Snatch Steal, which can basically activate as a Change of Heart. Moving on to the traps, we've got a Call of the Haunted to bring back any of our powerful monsters or our Jinzo. We've got Imperial Order to shut down all of our opponent's spells. This card is also meta warping, and it's just insanely good, even if it can be stopped by a Mystical Space Typhoon. We've got 3 Jar of Greed, which may seem like a weird choice, but it's actually, for this format, incredibly good. Jar of Greed basically draws you 1 card deeper into your deck while also filling up your graveyard with an additional card to banish off of things like Bazoo and Skull Lair. We've got a Mirror Force to stop our opponent's aggressive pressure. Skull Lair is an incredible continuous trap that can banish cards from your graveyard to destroy monsters on the field whose level equal the number of cards you banish. So this thing is just insanely, insanely good as a continuous piece of removal. If your opponent can't stop it, it will cause them a lot of problems. We've got a Time Seal in here. I sort of view this as a 4th copy of Jar of Greed because it's basically another trap that is chainable to spell and trap removal just like Jar of Greed, and provides another card in graveyard. And also playing around with the resource game, Jar of Greed gains you a resource, Time Seal deprives your opponent of a resource. So, you know, it's very similar to Jar of Greed in that respect, although I think it's a lot less good than Jar of Greed, because in general, gaining yourself resources is better than depriving your opponent of resources. But I definitely see why this is in here. And lastly, for some more removal, we've got Torrential Tribute and a Trap Hole. Trap Hole is great if you've already got a beater on board and your opponent summons out a beater that can beat over it. Then you fire the Trap Hole. Torrential is great at stemming a lot of aggressive pressure, although if you've got beaters of your own on the field, you don't necessarily want to use this. So I see why both of these are in the deck here. For the side deck, we've got a Penguin Knight for Empty Jar because this card plays very well with Needleworm. We've got a card Destruction for Exodia, I presume. We've got 2 Fishers. If our opponent is on a more beatdown focused strategy, these can be good to bring in to take out their monsters. We've got a Heavy Storm and 2 Dust Tornado to act as more removal. We've got 2 Noblemen of Crossout for any flip-based strategies like Empty Jar. We've got a Swords Revealing Light to buy us some time if our opponent's on a bit more of an aggressive strategy. We've got a Magic Cylinder, again, if our opponent's on a bit more of an aggressive strategy. This can be very good in that instance. We've got 2 Torrential Tribute for the same reason. And lastly, we've got 2 Seven Tools of the Bandit. Pretty sure these are in here in case our opponent's on a bit of a counter trap strategy, as this can be really good if they fire a Solemn Judgment and you chain 7 Tools of the Bandit. That can potentially just be the end of the game. And that's going to do it for the deck. Kesha also included 1 card in the extra deck, Musician King, which will never realistically come up. Technically, there is a reason in this format to play a full extra deck, as Summoner of Illusions is now a card, so if your opponent is playing like a deck using Summoner of Illusions, you can potentially get out a fusion monster if you Change of Heart that Summoner of Illusions. So technically you should be playing a full fusion deck, but realistically it doesn't matter. So that's perfectly fine. And this deck is just sick. I may personally disagree with some ratios or tech choices, but I think that this deck is incredibly competent, very good, and I can definitely see why it won a tournament. But instead of me just talking up this deck's strengths, let's dive into some games so you can see them for yourself. Okay, we've got a game against Dump Truck, who's been a guest on the channel before. Always a pleasure to have them on. We are playing Kesha's Tomato Control or B Spellcaster list. Unclear what they're playing, but let's find out. We're going to start off with an intense rock, paper, scissors battle that unfortunately we do lose. Hopefully that doesn't bode too poorly for the game itself. We are going to go second here, and this is a decent opener. Whenever you open Imperial Order, it's always a pretty decent opener. And it looks like they don't have any hand rips for us. So that's pretty nice as well. They're just going to set 1, set 2, and pass. I think we got to decide whether we want to go aggressive here. We could just summon out the Kaiku and try getting into their set, just having a beater on field. But that could play into their back row a little bit, and we don't necessarily want to blind MST1 in case they've got like a Jar of Greed. So I think we also kind of want to play this a bit defensively. We're going to set this Mystic Tomato here, set a Mystical Space Typhoon, and set an Imperial Order and pass back to them. They're going to draw here, and they're going to summon out a Gemini Elf, and they're going to attack into our set. It is a Mystic Tomato, so we'll be able to get out a Witch of the Black Forest. Now, the reason we do this instead of bringing out another Mystic Tomato is if they're playing something like Fisher, then they can just clear our Mystic Tomato after we've brought it out. So it's better to get a search. Also, Witch will be able to search out Bazoo from deck, which can get over their Elf, so that's pretty nice as well. Main 2, they're going to set another pass back to us. We draw Monster Reborn, which is a pretty good draw. Instead of going aggressive here, we're just going to switch the Witch to defense, set this Sangan, and pass back to them. We don't really have a way to get super aggressive this turn, given that, you know, Witch is still on field. We'd have to crash it to get the Kaiku to hand, and then that would be after battle phase, so we might as well get more defensive. If they've got a mass board clear, we get 2 searches here, so it's not that big of a deal. They're just going to attack into our set with the Gemini Elf. It's a Sangan, and we've got to decide what to pick here. We're just going to grab another Tomato. Tomato's great at replacing itself, and we do have some decent targets left in deck, even if Sangan and Witch are gone. They are going to pass back to us, and we draw a Time Seal, which is okay. Not the best, but not the worst either. We're just going to set this Mystic Tomato, pass back to them. They're going to flip up a Mystic Tomato of their own, getting a bit more aggressive here. They're going to attack into the Mystic Tomato with the Gemini Elf, and we will get a search, and we don't necessarily want to bring out another Tomato because then they can crash their Tomato into it and get a search, so we might want to bring out something else instead. And we're going to actually think about what to do here, because if we can bring out Cannon Soldier, then they can also crash into that. And Mass Sorcerer is the last target in deck. It does lose to Tomato here, but getting it in grave adds another monster to grave, so if we do get Bazoo later, then we can have fodder for it. So this is a bit iffy, but I do think that it makes sense overall. So they're going to attack in to the Mass Sorcerer with the Tomato and pass back to us. We draw Skull Lair, which is very nice. We now have fodder for this, as well as we have 4 cards in grave, which can deal with the Tomato. So we're just going to set the Skull Lair and pass back to them. They're just going to attack, so we will get to search out a Jinzo here. We could have searched out a Bazoo, but I think we get the Jinzo to pair with the Snatch Steal to potentially clear their Mystic Tomato, and also shut off their traps, which is nice. They're going to get in for 1900 here. Main 2, they're going to fire Forceful Sentry, and we're just going to Imperial Order that to keep the Jinzo in hand. And they're going to pass back to us. And we got to think about whether we want to actually pay for the Imperial Order or not. If we pay for the Imperial Order, we can't actually Snatch Steal Jinzo. So it might not be worth it. And indeed, I think I do just let it go. So this Imperial Order basically just traded for a Forceful Sentry, but I think that's a pretty good trade ultimately. We're going to fire the Snatch Steal on the Mystic Tomato. They have an Imperial Order of their own, but we've got a Mystical Space Typhoon, so we'll be able to clear that. We get the Tomato, trade it off for a Jinzo, and we'll attack into the Gemini Elf. If they're playing something like Rush Recklessly, this gets a bit punished, but not many people are playing that right now. So we are able to just attack over the Elf and pass back to them. They're going to fire a Confiscation, and now, unfortunately, we don't have an Imperial Order, and if we did, we couldn't activate with Jinzo on the field, so they will be able to see our hand here and send the Monster Reborn, which I think is a pretty good pick on their part. They're going to set 1, pass back to us, we draw a Mystical Space Typhoon, and we don't want to fire Raigeki here, because it could be like a Sangan or a Witch. If we did fire the Raigeki, we'd be able to get in for 4,200 points of damage and banish cards from their graveyard, which would be very nice. But I think that given that they know that we've got Raigeki, they wouldn't set something like a Flip Monster or a Mystic Tomato, or at least that's my reasoning. So we just summon out the Kaiku and try and get in here. Unfortunately, they did outplay us a bit. Knowing that we knew that they knew that we had the Raigeki, they set a Mystic Tomato, assuming that we'd think that they were playing around Raigeki, and it worked out for them. So they'll be able to get out another Mystic Tomato. We've got to think about whether we want to actually crash into that or fire the Raigeki in main phase 2. And I think we are just going to crash into it because this does deprive them of 2 cards in graveyard, which is pretty nice. So we are going to banish a tomato and an elf here. We start with the monsters as, if they get back a hand rip with something like Magician of Faith, 1 that takes a turn of setup so we can potentially play around that with the Raigeki. And 2, if they're able to reborn or call the Haunted back one of these monsters, it could be bad for us. So we do damage and banish. And they're going to bring out a Witch of the Black Forest, which is pretty worrying for us as they can get out a Bazoo here, which can clear the Jinzo, although not with Kaiku on field, which is pretty nice. They're going to bring out a Kaiku of their own, and they're going to switch the Witch to defense, attack into our Kaiku that will crash, and then they're just going to pass back to us. And I think this makes a lot of sense, because while we had our Kaiku on field, they could not use their Bazoo to clear the Jinzo, and that's a very good way to clear Jinzo. So we draw a Bazoo of our own, so we're going to think about whether to use it or not. And I think we're maybe thinking about whether we just go in for 4,900 points of damage, because we banish 3 with Bazoo and Raigeki their Witch, then we get in for a ton here. They'd search out Bazoo probably and hit over our Jinzo, but then we'd have Skull Lair to clear the Bazoo, so we could potentially get in for lethal next turn. So it is a possibility. However, we're not actually going to do it. We're just going to attack into their Witch with our Bazoo. They're going to grab a Bazoo of their own. And we are going to attack in with the Jinzo, not the Bazoo that already attacked. And we're going to deal 2,400. We could have gotten in for 100 more if we'd banished 3 off Bazoo. But I'm fine just leaving Bazoo at 1,600. Next turn, they're either going to summon a monster to clear Bazoo, or they're going to summon out their Bazoo and attack over Jinzo. Either way, I'm fine with the situation as is. I much rather prefer Jinzo remaining on field than Bazoo. So if they do just summon out a monster to clear Bazoo, then I'm fine with that. If they clear the Jinzo instead, then I keep Bazoo anyways. So I think that this was the right choice. They're going to summon a Bazoo of their own. And they're going to banish 3. So this will be able to get them over Jinzo. They're going to banish their 3 spells and traps, which makes sense, as those are harder to get back. They're going to attack over the Jinzo and deal 100. And then they're just going to set 1 and pass. And we're going to draw a Dark Hole here, which is very interesting. I don't think we really need to use that yet. We're just going to try and fire a Skull Lair here. And that's fine by them. So we're going to banish 4 to get rid of their Bazoo. And we're just going to banish the cards that are hardest for us to get back here. Although maybe we should have banished like a Mass Sorcerer or something instead of like a Reborn or a Snatch Steal, because we do have Magician of Faith in deck. But we went for this instead. And we're going to think about how aggressive we want to get here. And we are indeed going to banish 3 to just get in for 2,500. They do have a Call of the Haunted here, but we do have a Mystical Space Typhoon. So we will be able to clear that and get in for 2,500. So I'm feeling pretty good since they're only at 1,200 life points. We're going to set 1 as a bluff and pass back to them. They're going to fire Mystical Space Typhoon on our new set, so that's kind of unfortunate because it was a Dark Hole there. And then they're going to Monster Reborn targeting Jinzo. Now, this is a crucial moment in the game, because our Bazoo has 2,500 attack right now. So they've got to have some way to actually clear Bazoo or, get Bazoo off our side of the field in order to make this play make sense. So I can either let this go through and hope that the way they have to clear Bazoo doesn't actually kill me, or I could make the very unintuitive play of using Skull Lair to banish 4 cards from my graveyard, including Jinzo, to pop this Bazoo here. And it's a crucial decision because this can make or break the game. I'm taking a big risk as I'm losing my field presence, and they might have an additional monster in hand. But if I let them get Jinzo, I can't interact with them anymore, and they could just kill me out of nowhere. So it is a big thing here. But ultimately, I am indeed going to use Skull Lair, banish the Jinzo and some other cards from grave to pop the Bazoo. And it's a bit iffy as, now I've got no monsters on field and they can basically do what they want. But this way, the Skull Lair is still online. I've got Time Seal that I can activate to add another card engraved to get 4 cards engraved to pop whatever monster they bring out. Unless it's Kaiku, that would be pretty bad for me. But I've got Raigeki for Kaiku and pretty much any other monster that they might bring out that can get around Skull Lair. So, looks like they don't have an additional monster, though. They're just going to set one in past, and I feel very good about that. Unfortunately, we don't draw a monster of our own. We just draw a trap hole. We're going to fire Time Seal, since we do know that they probably don't have any monster that they can use right now, and we're just going to set this trap hole. They're just going to pass back to us with 2 cards in hand. And unfortunately, we don't draw a monster of our own. We're just going to set this Jar of Greed, pass back to them. They will get a draw this time, but it looks like they don't really have anything good to use. We draw Kaiku, which is very nice. We're going to summon that out. Unfortunately, they do have the trap hole for the Kaiku. We're just going to pass back to them. They are going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Gemini Elf, which is very nice. We'll summon that out. They've got a Torrential Tribute, very unfortunate. We'll pass back to them. And it looks like they have a Painful Choice. They didn't draw a monster, but Painful Choice is incredibly good here, as this can probably get them a monster. They're going to banish 5 good ones, 5 monsters that can potentially get them on field and out of this situation. And it's a bit iffy which one I want to give them here. I think that probably I want to give them like a Gemini Elf, as I can just trap hole that if they summon it out, and that wouldn't be that bad. That way I can save the Skull Lair activation for later. Yeah, I think I'm going to give them Gemini Elf here. Yeah, and I do give them the Elf, so they'll be able to add that to hand. And they are going to summon out the Elf, and so we're going to trap hole that. They're going to send another pass back to us. We draw Confiscation, which isn't the best. We really want to draw a monster here, so we're going to fire this Jar of Greed to draw a monster, hopefully. It's not a monster, but we can fire Confiscation here just to see what they're working with. And it seems like they've got a Change of Heart and a Snatch Steal, which, it makes me very glad that we didn't let them get the Jinzo, as if they had had these when they did that play, then that would just be the end of the game here. So, we are going to take the Change of Heart, as if we draw like a Magician of Faith, we don't want them to Change of Heart it. We can play around Snatch Steal a lot better. So the Change of Heart will go to grave there, and we will just set this Fisher as a bluff and pass back to them. They'll pass back to us. We draw a Change of Heart of our own. We're just going to pass back to them. They are going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Torrential Tribute, which is very nice. This can stop any aggressive pressure that they might have. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Cannon Soldier, which could just be the end of the game here if we summon it out and attack in. However, it's very, very unlikely that they actually don't have a way to stop our Cannon Soldier from attacking. So we're actually going to make a very interesting play here. Given that, there are some cards like Premature Burial that do require you to pay 800 life points, and it would be very bad if they were actually able to Premature Burial back something good. We are actually just going to think about this for a bit, and we're going to summon the Cannon Soldier and use Priority to deal 500 damage right away. Maybe this was a mistake because, we could have wasted a trap hole, and we do know that they have a trap hole because they didn't see that we said Prio. But it was very likely they had a trap hole anyways. So maybe we should have just used the Cannon Soldier to waste a trap hole. But the way I figure it is that shutting them off from something like Premature Burial is a lot more valuable to me. And we could just potentially win through deck out here. That is a viable option given that they're 3 cards lower in deck than we are. And it seems like they don't really have any monsters left. And we've got a Skull Lair online with monsters in grave. So I figure it's better just to put them off of things like Premature Burial that can get them back in the game, instead of just going for a greedy, aggressive play here. We're just going to set this Change of Heart as another bluff and pass back to them. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Mirror Force. We're just going to Change of Heart their set and see what it is. It's a Cannon Soldier, which is actually very interesting because we could potentially just flip up the Cannon Soldier, pay 500 with Priority again, drop them down to 200, putting them in an even riskier position. But I figure now we can try and get them to waste a trap hole, given that they're below the Premature Burial threshold. And we've already used up our Monster Reborn, so it's not like we can reborn back our Cannon Soldier. We could potentially call the Haunted back the Cannon Soldier, which maybe means that I should have actually gone for the Prio activation here. But instead, I think about it for a bit, and I just flip up the Cannon Soldier without using Prio. They're going to trap hole that. And unfortunately, we just got to set a Mirror Force and pass. I mean, that's not bad because Mirror Force can stop their aggressive pressure, but it is a bit rough. We draw Forceful Sentry. Not really useful right now as it adds a card back to their deck, which kind of goes against our deck out game plan now. So they're just going to pass back to us. We draw Heavy Storm, which could be very good for later, just making a super aggressive push later on. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw Painful Choice, which we will not activate right now because we are trying to potentially win through deck out. So we're just going to pass back to them. They are going to set another pass back to us. We draw Mystical Space Typhoon. We're just going to set that because why not? It can interact with them on their turn, and you never know what might happen. And we draw a Call the Haunted of our own, which we really do want to set. So we're going to fire Mystical Space Typhoon on one of their sets. It's a Mystical Space Typhoon. They're going to go for our middle back row. It's just a Fisher, so it won't really matter there. We're going to set this Call the Haunted, pass back to them. They're going to set another pass back to us. We draw a Jar of Greed, which is pretty good. We're going to just fire the Call of the Haunted, try targeting like Jinzo or something. They're going to Mystical Space Typhoon that, so that will clear the Call of the Haunted there. We're going to set a Jar of Greed, which we maybe don't want to activate right now, but we're going to set it anyways. They're going to pass back to us. We draw Magician of Faith, which is very, very nice. We're going to set that. We could potentially just summon it and try getting in for more damage, but I think it's fine setting to get back a powerful spell. They're going to set another pass back to us. We draw Mystic Tomato, and we make a major misplay here. We flip up Magician of Faith, going for a potential Reborn, but we don't actually have a Reborn in grave because we banished it for the Bazoo, I think. So this is maybe a sign that we shouldn't have banished the Reborn. We should have left it in grave for the Magician of Faith. But I really should have checked the graveyard before doing this. As is, I just get a Change of Heart, which is probably good enough to win the game. We're going to fire a Jar of Greed here and draw a card. We're going to fire Heavy Storm to clear their back row, and they're just going to admit defeat because they know that it's probably all over for them. So that was a very intense game one and a very unexpected way to end it. I do actually think we could have won by deck out there instead. It might have actually been the safer option to do so, not using up our Heavy Storm to keep the Skull Lair and all our other traps on field. But I figured not many people are playing Woboku in this format, so we were very likely to be able to get game that turn, and we were indeed. But while we did win that game, I think it kind of shows why I said that I kind of wanted more monsters in the deck breakdown, as there were long periods where neither of us were drawing monsters. So I do think that having more of the beat sticks in your deck is a good thing. And, I've since sort of made my own version of the Beast Spellcaster deck, heavily based on Kesha's build, but which does have some more beat sticks, so I will be showing that off on the channel later. But that is something that you've got to keep in mind. You don't have unlimited beaters in these sorts of decks, so you need to know when you're running low on them, because aggressive pressure can be a major, major factor of the game later on. So we are going to go into game 2 here, and let's hope that it's as good as game 1 was. So this is a pretty good opener. Any opener with Painful Choice is a pretty great opener. They're going to summon out a Kaiku, set one, and pass back to us. We're going to draw a Dark Hole, but we're just going to fire Painful and see what they give us here. So we're going to send a Forceful, Duo, Comfy, because, might as well send those if it's the first turn. Just get a hand rip potentially. We're also going to send a Jinzo and a Mystical Space Typhoon. Maybe I should have sent something else besides the Mystical Space Typhoon. But I figure we'd like the Jinzo in hand for the Change of Heart. Mystical Space Typhoon would also be nice because we can just pop the back row, crash our Kaiku into their Kaiku, and then set some cards. Or we could just Dark Hole their Kaiku and summon our Kaiku. There's a lot of different options here, but maybe I should have sent a more powerful spell like Pot of Greed instead to force them to give us the Jinzo. I do like this play though. So they will indeed give us the Mystical Space Typhoon. And we're just going to clear that back row. And it's a Mirror Force, so glad I cleared it. We're just going to summon out this Kaiku, crash into their Kaiku. And main phase 2, we're just going to set a Jar of Greed, pass back to them. I think maybe I could have just set the Time Seal as well, but I think I'm trying to play around Delinquent Duo a little bit in case they draw that. they're going to set 2 and pass back to us. So it seems like our risky play did pay off. It was a bit risky. If they had a Kaiku of their own, they could banish the Jinzo from our graveyard. But it looks like it worked out. So we're going to summon the Sangan here, attack in for 1,000. They're going to fire a Call of the Haunted here to bring back the Kaiku, which is quite unfortunate. Main 2, we're going to fire this Jar of Greed to draw one, see if we get anything to deal with the Kaiku. And Pot of Greed is a pretty good one. We're going to fire Pot of Greed, draw 2 here, and those are some pretty good draws. We're going to fire a Dark Hole just to clear that Kaiku. We really don't want to lose our Jinzo from the graveyard, and also this deprives them of some aggressive pressure. We're going to get this Mystic Tomato, set a Time Seal, and pass back to them. They're going to fire a Forceful Sentry, so they will get to see our hand here, but I honestly don't know what the pick is. Maybe the Change of Heart, that's very, very good. But maybe the Mass Sorcerer if you don't have much aggressive pressure. I think there's a lot of different options here. They are indeed going to pick the Change of Heart, so that will get shuffled back. I think that's a very good pick here. But it's a tough choice for them. We draw a Mystical Space Typhoon, which is pretty nice. We're going to summon out the Mass Sorcerer to try and bait something out here. And we do indeed. It's a Torrential there. And we're going to fire a Time Seal and set a Mystical Space Typhoon. Again, just like last game, we feel like they probably don't have much aggressive pressure, so we just want to shut them off of drawing more. They're just going to set 1 and pass back to us. We draw Heavy Storm, which is pretty decent, but not really right now. So we'll just summon out a Witch of the Black Forest, attack in for 1,100, and pass back to them. They are going to think about what to do here, and they're going to fire a Reborn targeting Jinzo. And that's okay with us, as if they hit over the Witch, then we can get a Bazu, which can beat over the Jinzo. So they're going to attack in to our Witch. We'll take 13 here, and we'll search out this Bazu, the Soul Eater. And they're just going to pass back to us. We draw a Jar of Greed, which is pretty nice. We're going to bring out Bazu, banish 3 from our graveyard. We're just going to banish 2 of the hand rips in a painful choice, none of which are the best late in the game. So our Bazu will jump up to 2,500, which will be able to clear the Jinzo. That will get over Jinzo. Main 2, we're just going to set this Jar of Greed, pass back to them. We figure if we can bait them into setting more back row, and then just use up Jar of Greed later, we can have a pretty profitable Heavy Storm. And with a Bazu on field and another monster in hand, we can get super aggressive here. They're going to just summon out a Gemini Elf, and that's fine by us. And they've got a Skull Lair. So we notice that they've got 6 cards in graveyard. So something to keep in mind with Skull Lair is that if you use a Mystical Space Typhoon on a Skull Lair in response to its effect, then they can actually chain the effect again. So if they've got like 8 cards in graveyard and you let them activate Skull Lair the first time, so they banish 4, and then you chain Mystical Space Typhoon, they will be able to banish another 4, so they will still be able to get rid of your monster. But we noticed that our opponent has 6 cards in graveyard, so in this case, it won't really be as big of an issue. So we will just let them trigger the effect, banish 4, and then we will fire the Mystical Space Typhoon, which will get rid of the Skull Lair. And while Mystical Space Typhoon and other sorts of spell and trap removal do not negate in general, when they are destroying a card that's like a continuous trap or continuous spell, then that will actually prevent the effect of that card from going through. So something good to know. And they're just going to pass back to us. We're going to fire this Jar of Greed to draw 1 deeper into our deck. And with that Reborn, we might be able to wrap it up. No, I don't think we will, because I guess if we Reborn Jinzo, summon out Tomato, crash Tomato into Gemini Elf to bring out a Cannon Soldier, and then clear the Gemini Elf, that's 4,400 plus 1,500. No, that's not quite enough. We can get to 5,900 damage, but it won't quite get us there. So we actually have to decide how aggressive we want to get here. And we are actually going to fire a Reborn and target Kaiku instead of Jinzo. And this may seem a bit weird, but that we're going to fire Heavy Storm, and we're going to banish 3 from Grave. This will be able to clear the Gemini Elf with the Bazu, and we'll be able to get aggressive either way. But this way we can also deprive them of resources in graveyard and turn off things like Skull Lair in the future. So we are going to get in for a ton of damage and then just set this Jar of Greed, potentially get a draw next turn. So we're feeling very, very good about this situation. If they've got like Raigeki or Dark Hole, then it's obviously a lot worse for us, but overall I feel fine. And we draw another Mystic Tomato. We're going to just fire this Jar of Greed to draw something potentially that can deal with their sets. and we draw another Bazoo, so that won't quite do it. We are just going to attack another set with the Bazoo, and looks like that's enough. So this was a bluff. Yep, it's a bluff, just a Mystical Space Typhoon. And this will be enough to win the game here. So I thought that was a great match. I think that it was very interesting, had a lot of very interesting and unique interactions. I want to point out the Skull Lair in particular as a card that really changes the format in a way that's new and exciting. I think it introduces a lot of sort of innovative lines that you can do. And I really like things like that. Anything that makes the format a little bit more complex, I'm a fan of. So let's dive into that as well. Okay, we've got our rematch against Dump Truck here. And we are going to go into this rock, paper, scissors and lose it again, just like last game. But, you know, last match, we were able to win through losing the rock, paper, scissors. So hopefully this match we were able to as well. This hand is interesting. No monsters, but we do have a jar to get us a monster, potentially. Oh, they're going to fire Forceful Sentry. That is a bit rough. In a hand of all back row, you kind of don't want your opponent to know what that back row is. So they're going to send back the Imperial Order, which makes a lot of sense here. And they are just going to set one and pass. So it looks like they don't have monsters either, which is very nice. We do draw a monster, Magician of Faith, but it's not really one we want to play right now, as we don't have any spells in grave, and it would be kind of a waste. So we're just going to set this Jar of Greed, pass back to our opponent. They're going to set one, pass back to us. And we're going to draw a Change of Heart, which is very nice, but not really the best right now. We're going to Jar of Greed. We draw a Forceful Sentry, so we might as well fire it. They've got an Imperial Order of their own, so, you know, that will trade for the Forceful. Kind of unfortunate, but now we can set this Magician of Faith and feel a lot better about it, since we've got a spell engraved that we want to get back. We're going to set this Skull Lair as well. We don't really have enough cards engraved right now to make it worthwhile. But if they do crash over our Magician of Faith, or just, you know, maybe fire Raigeki on it or something, we'll have a bit more. They're going to let that Imperial Order die, and they're going to fire a Delinquent Duo, which is a little bit rough for us, but it will give us 4 cards engraved for Skull Lair, I guess. They're going to hit the Change of Heart, which is unfortunate, and we're going to send the Call of the Haunted remaining in our hand. We don't really have any monsters in hand, so this is fine. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw Witch of the Black Forest, which is pretty nice. We're going to flip up a Magician of Faith just to get back a spell and play around Torrential a bit, as we do want to go aggressive with the Witch this turn. So we will grab back Change of Heart, and we are going to summon out the Witch and attack in for 1,400. May not be much, but when they don't have monsters on field, it's pretty good. They are going to just pass back to us, so we feel very good about this. We draw heavy, but we don't really feel the need to use it right now, as we don't want to lose our Skull Lair. And it seems like those back row don't really do anything to us right now. So we're going to pass back to them, and they're going to set another pass back to us. We feel really good here. We could summon out the Gemini Elf and just keep getting more aggressive. We could even Heavy Storm and then summon out the Gemini Elf, as that will be 3,300 points of damage, which is quite a bit. But I feel like we can afford to be a bit conservative here. Or not. I guess we're just going to fire the heavy either way. I guess with Change of Heart, getting them down to a very low life point total is a lot more worrying for them. So we're just going to pass back to them and sort of dare them to do something. With Reborn and Change of Heart, I'm feeling really good about this. And we'll also get a search if they do a mass board clear. They're going to fire Dark Hole, and we'll lose 3, but we will be able to get a Cannon Soldier. And this will just end the game on its own, really. As if we summon out the Cannon Soldier, use this effect with Prio, and then Reborn back the Cannon Soldier, we just win the game. So there's not really much they can do here. They're going to summon a Sangan and attack in for 1,000. That's fine by us. Main 2, they're going to set 2 and pass. We draw Trap Hole, which is okay, but it doesn't really matter at this point. We're going to use priority on the Cannon Soldier to tribute it off for 500, and then Reborn back that Cannon Soldier, and that will just be the end of the game. So even though our opponent was able to hand rip us for our life savings, we were able to somehow pull that one back from the jaws of defeat. So really cool. And again, I think this shows how many cool interactions there can be in this format. You know, the Cannon Soldier line was really cool in my opinion. I think there was a lot of interesting choices to make during that game. But to be fair, our opponent did get a bit unlucky. It seemed like they didn't really draw many monsters over the course of the game. So I feel like maybe that was a bit lucky on our part. But, you know, we take luck-based wins as well. So we are going to go second here again because we did win game 1 here. And they're going to start out with a Pot of Greed, which is very good. They're going to fire a Confiscation, which is also very good. They're going to look at our hand, and they are going to take the Change of Heart, which I think makes a lot of sense here. They're going to set one, set another, pass back to us. And we draw a Mirror Force, which is pretty good. This will protect our Gemini Elf potentially. We're just going to summon out the Gemini Elf, attack into their set, and they're going to grab a Mystic Tomato, which is pretty good for them. Kind of interesting they didn't grab a Bazoo here, which is what I would have expected, but that means that they likely have a Bazoo or something in hand. They're going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon in the end phase, likely just trying to snipe that Jar of Greed, and they do indeed hit the Jar of Greed. And they're going to summon out a Mass Sorcerer, which is a bit worrying, as it means that they probably have a way to deal with the Gemini Elf, and indeed they do. So they're going to attack in for 900, and we could Mirror Force this to prevent them from getting another resource here, but we will indeed just take it, as in this format, I really do think it's valuable to preserve your beat sticks from your opponent's beat sticks, and Mirror Force is a great tool at doing that. Maybe this was a major misplay, unclear. But it's what I did, and let's see if it pays off. Kaiku is a pretty great draw here. So we're going to summon out that Kaiku, attack into their Mass Sorcerer for 900, and we'll be able to banish 2 cards from their graveyard, which is pretty good. We're going to pass back to them. They are going to summon out a Kaiku of their own, and they're going to attack into our Kaiku. We could Mirror Force this just to preserve our Kaiku on field, but we will let that die, as they're also losing a monster in this exchange, so we're not too torn up about it. We draw a Witch of the Black Forest, which is another great draw. We could have summoned that out and just attacked in, but we're just going to go for our Tomato. This is playing a bit into their back row, so it's a bit unfortunate there. But it's a risk we're willing to take. They're going to bring out a Cannon Soldier, which is a bit worrying, as it means they probably have got like a Change of Heart or something. And it looks like they do indeed. So they're going to Change of Heart our Mystic Tomato. And they're going to attack in for 2,800 and then a Tribute. We could Mirror Force this, but again, I'm trying to save the Mirror Force for a point where we can protect one of our beaters. And so while this is unfortunate for us, we do just let it go through. We draw a Mass Sorcerer, which is very nice. We'll set that and pass back to them. This can withstand a Cannon Soldier attack and a Mystic Tomato attack, which we do know that they've got a Mystic Tomato in hand. They're going to bring out a Kaiku, though, so that will unfortunately not withstand the Kaiku. And we will indeed just Mirror Force here to clear their board. They're going to set one in main 2 and pass back to us. We draw Skull Lair, which is very nice with 6 cards in grave, especially when they've already used up 2 Kaikus. So we're going to flip up this Mass Sorcerer here, get in for 900. And unfortunately, they do have a Call of the Haunted, so they will bring back Kaiku, which really hurts us, as this Skull Lair is basically dead with Kaiku on field. And they'll be able to get in some damage to also deprive us of more cards in grave. So we actually do debate firing the Raigeki on the Kaiku, but in the end we settle against it, as we do have Witch to search out Gemini Elf, which can get over Kaiku. It's just a bit unfortunate here. They're going to bring out a Sangan, and they're going to attack in to the Mass Sorcerer with the Sangan, which I feel very good about. I was really worried that they were going to attack in to the Mass Sorcerer with the Kaiku and banish cards from grave. But this way we get to keep cards in our graveyard, and they attack over the Witch, so we will get a search here. We're going to grab a Gemini Elf, and they'll pass back to us. We draw Fisher, which is okay, so we're going to just summon out the Elf, attack into the Kaiku, clear that, and then we're just going to actually pass back to them. We could have Fishered the Sangan, but we don't want them to get a search right now. And if they commit more to board, we can Raigeki the board instead and save the Fisher for later. We've also got the Skull Lair for whatever they might have to deal with our board, so we feel very good about this. And they're just going to switch the Sangan defense, fire Forceful Sentry, which is a bit unfortunate, but they are going to send back this Raigeki, so we have a bit less plays than we did before, and they're going to set one and pass back to us. Mystical Space Typhoon is okay, but not the best for here. And we're actually going to think a bit about what we want to do here. We check what's in grave just to see what they've used up and also see what they could potentially get back if that is a Magician of Faith. And Change of Heart is a very good card to get back in that case. So, a bit worrying. We're just going to attack in to the Magician of Faith here. They will get back the Change of Heart indeed. Main phase 2, we are going to think about this a bit, and we are actually going to Fisher the Sangan. They will get a search here, but if they Change of Hearted our Gemini Elf and tributed over the Sangan for a Jinzo, that would just be game. So, yeah, I decide to Fisher the Sangan here just in case. And we're going to pass back to them. We're going to fire Skull Lair here in the standby phase, And I think actually I just want to use the Skull Lair here now. I think I should do that because we do know about the Change of Heart. But the Change of Heart will remain a threat throughout. And I flip it up in standby phase because you can't activate the effect of this card when you first activate the card itself. It's a weird way that continuous traps work in this format and many other old formats. So I flip it up in the standby phase just in case. It's a bit iffy, but I might have to just Skull Lair my own Gemini Elf. And they're going to bring out a Kaiku, so that will actually shut down my Skull Lair play here either way. I was planning on Skull Lairing the Gemini Elf if they had like a Change of Heart, but now I can't do that because of the Kaiku. And they're going to fire that Change of Heart, so that will just be the end of the game, unfortunately. So we did lose that game, but I think it does show some of the very interesting interactions here. I flipped up Skull Lair preemptively to try and play around Change of Heart, but Kaiku was able to play around Skull Lair. So there are so many cards in this format that counter other cards that makes for some really interesting dynamics and some very interesting gameplay. So we did lose game 2 there, but this does mean that we'll get to go first here, so I'm not complaining about that. Maybe we can open some hand rips and feel pretty good about that. And we do open a hand rip. That's pretty good. Oh, wow. We opened 2 hand rips. Yeah, we're just going to fire that Forceful right away. See what they've got. And they've got a hand of all monsters. So, we might have to think about how exactly to deal with this. I think what we might want to do is send back something like a Tomato and then Comfy a Sangan. Just to get those things a bit more offline. I think that might be what we do. Actually, we're going to send back the Kaiku. I guess because Kaiku does get over Bazoo, we don't really have anything to deal with Kaiku in our hand right now. So we'll just send that back to deck. So they will send the Kaiku back. And then we're going to fire a Confiscation and take out the Sangan. So I think that makes sense. They can bring out a Witch off the Tomato and then potentially get Kaiku to hand that way. But we've sort of played around it a little bit, and we've got this Bazoo in hand for later to deal with whatever other beaters they might have. So they're going to just set one of their own, set another pass back to us, and we draw another Bazoo. Instead of going on the aggressive here, given that we do know that they've got Tomato, we're just going to set this Mass Sorcerer and pass back to them. They're going to fire a Dark Hole, which is a bit unfortunate. We will lose our Sangan here, but we will be able to get a search off of that, grabbing us a Mystic Tomato, which is pretty nice. They're going to bring up a Zoo, and they're going to get aggressive here. So they're going to banish only one, going up to 19. I think this is just in case we have a Kaiku. Won't be able to clear the Bazoo. And Gemini Alpha would have to crash with the Bazoo in this case. And this also does preserve their graveyard for future Bazoo plays. So I think this makes a lot of sense. They're going to pass back to us. Whoa! Delinquent Duo when they've got 2 cards in hand is pretty crazy. We're going to fire that Delinquent Duo, discard the remaining 2 cards, bring out a Bazoo of our own, and banish 2 so ours will get over theirs. And they've got no cards on field or in hand. We've got a very powerful monster on field, a heavy to deal with whatever back row they've got, and more good monsters in hand. So I'm feeling very, very good about this one. They're going to set one pass back to us. We draw Gemini Elf, and you know, we're just going to heavy that 1 card as we're just going to deprive them of every resource they draw. We're going to decide to banish 2 here with the Bazoo again. This will prevent them from crashing into it, something like a Gemini Elf. So we feel good about that. And we're going to get in for a ton of damage. And next turn, if they don't have anything, we can just win here. So we feel very good about this. They're just going to set another here. And we draw Pot of Greed. Wow. I mean, sometimes you just sack your opponent, and a Mystical Space Typhoon on top of that will wrap things up. But wow, that was a mega sack there. I mean, that was insane. That was the sackiest I think I've ever been here. And we technically misplay here. Technically, we should have summoned out a Bazoo on top of this to make sure that we had lethal, even if they had Karibo, but it doesn't matter. They don't have Karibo, and that will be the end of the game. So I think these matches were really good at both showing off the strengths and flaws of this deck and this format. In terms of this format, you know, I think there are a lot of super cool interactions that can happen. So many cards that like hard counter other cards. That's really cool trying to play around all of those and trying to sort of like have the counter to your opponent's counter. However, as this game 3 shows, it's still very sacky sometimes, you know? all the powerful DM staple cards are legal, and occasionally you can just hand rip your opponent into oblivion, Pot of Greed into more stuff, and just win the game off the backs of those very powerful cards. So games can either be really good this format or really bad, but hopefully these do show that more of the games tend to be good than bad, even if you get a bit sacked. Like, we did get hand ripped in some of these past games here, and we were able to recover, so the hand rips are not the end of the world in most cases. But if you do get mega sacked like this, then there's not really much you can do. In terms of the deck itself, I do think it's a very good deck, and I see why it's tier 1. It just has so many flexible options and can get aggressive super quickly. I think in terms of the specific build of the deck, I was really feeling a lack of monsters at certain points in the game. So I think I'd probably add more monsters, and I will feature some games featuring my own spin on this deck later on in this week. But that would be my main feeling from playing these games, and this is why it's important to sort of play games with whatever top decks in the format there are, as not every deck is made for every person, and certain decks you want to tailor to your own taste. And for me, I personally prefer a bit more monsters, but I might not have known that if I hadn't tried out this deck. All in all, I think that this deck is super cool. I think these games showed how much fun this Beast Spellcaster or Tomato Control, whatever you want to call it, how fun this mirror can be. And I'm excited to play some more of these in the future. But what do you think of these games and decks, and what do you think of this format? Do you sort of hate to see this sort of good stuff mirror no matter how interesting it is? Or is this sort of gameplay like what you love about Yu-Gi-Oh? Because there is something really fun about a format where a lot of the decks are largely similar, and it comes down to just skill and interacting with the opponent in very interesting ways in order to actually win the games. But let me know what you think down in the comments below, and until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.